do you want to be great? Seriously, do you want to be great at something? Because I think it's a really interesting question. I think your initial reaction is probably, well, yeah, of course I want to be great at whatever I do, whether that be in my career, physically, mentally. Of course you want to be great. But I think when you start to unpack it, it doesn't really work out to be like that. Because being great at something is, of course, a very appealing idea, being the best at something, being excellent at a craft or something. But by definition, not everyone can be great. Actually, only a select few people can be great. And that's because to be great at something, it actually takes a lot of work. And whilst it may seem appealing on the surface to want to be great at something, you kind of have to balance off the sacrifice it requires to be great at something. You know, you don't just become great and just perform at an average level. You have to go above and beyond. That's the whole idea of it. And I bring this up because I've recently been rewatching The Last Dance, which is the Michael Jordan and Chicago Bulls basketball documentary. It's an absolute banger. It's very biased towards Michael Jordan, of course, because it's his documentary, but it's really, really interesting. And it's got me thinking a lot about this idea of greatness. Because if there's probably one person, when I think of greatness, I think Michael Jordan's probably one of the first people that comes to mind. You know, if you don't know anything about him, he won 6 championships. He went 6-0 in the finals, never lost a finals in the NBA. He had 2 three-peats, 3 years in a row he won championships, 3 years in a row he won championships. Greatest basketball player of all time, almost unquestionably. There's an argument for some other people, but let's be real, it's MJ, right? But he is the pure definition of greatness, I'd say. I think that's really interesting because he has this mentality, this absolute win at all cost mentality. Like no one would really call him. It's the same with Kobe Bryant as well. You see these two guys and no one would call them nice people, at least when you're playing basketball with them. He's yelling at you to get better. He's absolutely screaming in your face because he wants to win championships. And if you're not going to support him in that, he is going to put you in your place. It's crazy. And the amount of work you see these guys like Kobe putting in, the work he puts in, he's training 8 hours, 10 hours a day, absolutely insanity how much work he was putting in. And it paid off because he's arguably a top 10 basketball player of all time. Jordan's, of course, being the greatest of all time. And this mindset of greatness is just super interesting to me because I think it appeals to all of us. I think we all want to be great at something. But the question is, are we willing to sacrifice what it takes to become great at something? And it's this trade-off. It's the whole idea of this trade-off because there has to be sacrifices. If you want to be the best at something, if you don't just want to be average, then you have to sacrifice. You can't just do what the average person does or you'll get an average result. You have to do what great people do. And great people put in a lot of fucking work to get where they want to get. And this also ties into this other idea I've been thinking about. I linked a video on the Discord, link in the description if you want to join that. And it's this idea, it was this video by a guy called, I think it's Sisyphus55 or something. And it's this idea of pleasure versus suffering. And I think this kind of ties in with greatness. Because there's this Nietzschean idea, I think it's at least Nietzschean, and I might be paraphrasing it and kind of misquoting it, but there's this idea that Nietzsche had that pleasure and suffering kind of exist in equilibrium. It's not like they need to have like an equal force within your life to reach a super high level of pleasure, a super high level of accomplishment, a super high level of greatness even. There has to be an equal and opposite force, kind of like as a physics, I don't know, I'm not a science guy. There has to be an opposite force of suffering, of training, of putting in the work to kind of reach that level of pleasure. And I found this really, really interesting. Because do you think it's worth it? Is it really worth it? You look at what Michael Jordan had to do, right? He would have been training his whole life. Basketball, 8 hours a day. Basketball, diet, has to facilitate basketball. Doesn't go on holidays. It's basketball. Off-season training, basketball. If you actually want to be the greatest of all time at something, the trade-off is just lunacy. To the average person, you can't even comprehend the sacrifices those type of people have to make. Not only do they have to sacrifice the relationships around them, I mean, you look at guys like MJ and Kobe, they're not good friends with anyone's on their team. They're far from good friends with anyone's on their team. They might have good moments with them, but they want to win at all costs. And if you're not performing at the level that they need to win, you're probably not going to get very along with them, to be honest. So you sacrifice your relationship. You sacrifice everything else in your life. You sacrifice any other pursuit you might want to do. You sacrifice a lot of time, tens of thousands of hours of time. And that's like the equilibrium, right? Because you've sacrificed so much, the reward is so high. The pleasure is so high. When you see Jordan winning a championship throughout the season, I was watching the documentary. It says how he's not emotional. The only emotions you see out of him, anger and frustration at his team if they're not performing. But as soon as he gets his first ring in '91, you see him. It's that iconic photo of him holding the trophy and crying. Just bottled up all this emotion, all this hard work, all this suffering to that one point of just absolute pure bliss. It's a trade-off. I like this idea of it being an equal and kind of opposite reaction. You just can't experience it without the major lows, without the major highs. And I think it also works in reverse. Because if you say with something like pleasure, let's say you like drinking alcohol, maybe you like smoking, whatever it is, maybe you like eating, all these kind of like instant pleasure sources, instant dopamine, instant, chemicals going, wee. This is great. There's also, for that, even though it's not like a huge pleasure, it's a pretty decent pleasure, right? But I also think on the flip side of it, there's also that suffering. If you drink the alcohol, you'll be hungover the next day. If you smoke the weed, well, there's a fair few downsides to that. I probably don't know them too well. If you eat the fast food, you put on the weight, you're less healthy. I just find it super interesting because I think it's really true. I think for everything pleasurable and for everything with suffering, there's an equal and opposite reaction with your life that kind of brings it back to equilibrium. And again, I want to link this to another quote. There's this guy called, I'm going to butcher his name. I think he's Polish. That's probably why I don't like him. Kidding. Jerzy Gregorek. He was an Olympic weightlifter. And you've probably heard this quote before. I think Tim Ferriss has used it, and I was using the video that I've linked in my Discord. You should check it out. It's a really good video. And it's this quote. I think you've probably almost definitely heard it. And it's so simple, but it conveys so much meaning. I love it. I remember Struthless as well. Another YouTuber who's used this quote before. Hard choices, easy life. Easy choices, hard life. And again, I think it's this idea of equilibrium. It kind of comes back to it. You know, if you want to have this great body, you want to have a nice physique, you want to be healthy, you want to look good, guess what? That's going to take training every day. You're going to have a diet. You're going to have to hit a certain amount of protein every day. You're probably going to lose a certain amount of fat. Your sleep's going to suffer for it. You have to make really hard in the moment choices. You have to exert yourself physically. You have to make those strong. You have to have the strong mental will to not cheat on your diet. And as a result of making hard choices, you get that pleasure. You get that result you want. It's like a filter. It's like the suffering is a filter to the pleasure. That's kind of how I view it. There's a reason that everyone has a six-pack and has a great athletic physique looking. Not saying you have to have it, not making any comments like that, but it's something so hard to attain that kind of acts like a filter. We kind of see someone who's jacked, and I'm like, I see that. I'm like, I respect that. That takes a lot of hard work. That takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of dedication. So to put yourself through that, I kind of immediately respect someone who's jacked. Like, you've put in a lot of work on your body, and I really respect that. It's like a filter. It's because I haven't put in enough time to have a body like that. So I respect it. And then the same goes the other way. If you make easy choices, you have this instant gratification, instant pleasures. Well, your life kind of starts deteriorating. Those small imbalances where you have a bit of pleasure, so that therefore you have a bit of suffering. The suffering starts weighing up. It starts adding up. Maybe you're overweight. Maybe you have alcohol addiction. Maybe you're getting hungover every bloody day from drinking. Horrible stuff like this, right? And this is what the weightlifter, Gregorek, he said this quote. He was an alcoholic, but he managed to go from an alcoholic into an Olympic weightlifter. And now he's an author, I think. It's crazy. And I just think it's a beautiful quote because I think it's so damn simple. Hard choices, easy life. Easy choices, hard life. I don't think it gets any more simple with that. I think it's the beauty of a good quote is just how much it can communicate in such a simplistic way. Because it links in this idea with the pleasure and suffering, the balance between them. It links in with being great at something. So I guess I come back to greatness. I come back to greatness and where I stand on it. Because again, in essence, being great at something. Who wouldn't want to be great at something? But the question is, are you willing to have that equal force of suffering? Are you willing to put in all that work? You have the drive, the passion, the mindset to truly become excellent at something. You have all of this. Are you willing to sacrifice everything on the line to become great? Or will you just become good? Or hey, will you even just become average? I don't think there's an answer to that question. It's what you want with your life. I know some people probably want to tend towards that more equilibrium state where it's just like kind of smaller highs and smaller lows. They don't want all that fluctuation, which is perfectly fine. I 100% understand that. But personally, I don't know. I love the idea of kind of putting myself through hell. If you know anything about my main channel, I love doing a silly challenge because I just love the payoff of making a banger video, I love the idea of sitting at my desk for 14 hours a day playing Float Pyro so I can make a banger video. I love the idea of that immense suffering. It's like that filter. Like no one else is willing to do this, and the fact I am, I kind of take pride in that. I'm willing to do it, and I'm willing to get the payoff at the end of it. I just found a very, very interesting idea. I want to be great. I don't know if I have it in me to be great. I'm going to work every day to try and be great at video making, whatever I want to pursue. But I just think it's something interesting to think about. This idea of an equilibrium between pleasure and suffering. Are you willing to suffer and suffer and suffer just for that payoff? Get another ring. Be MJ, 6 rings. Do you want to be the greatest of all time at what you do? Or are you more content just living a fulfilled life? You don't necessarily have to be the greatest at something. You just be good at something. Nothing wrong with that either, but just some food for thought. Because I always watch the MJ documentaries. The second time I've watched it, I'm like, I want to get really good at making videos, but sometimes I just procrastinate like an idiot. And I just look at someone like MJ, I'm like, there's no way this guy takes a day off. He is super set. So I think some food for thought you can think about in relation to where your goals lie, what you want to do. Do you just want to get by, have a nice life, a fulfilling life, or do you truly want to be great at something, sacrifice relationships, sacrifice time, sacrifice everything it takes to be truly, truly great at something? I'd be interesting to see what people have to say about this. I think there's so many different schools of thought you can have about this. Maybe you'll push back on this idea of the pleasure and suffering, the kind of equilibrium they exist in, and I'm down to hear it. I'm interested to hear it. So I hope you're doing well. Make sure you join the Discord. Make sure you follow me on Instagram, follow me on Twitter, all of that stuff. I really want to hear what your thoughts are, so comment below on this one. I'll have a look at all of them. So yeah, farewell, Elite Level Gamer.